The words hung in the air like a thick, suffocating dust. Family failure. He spat them out, not at me, but at my children, who were blessedly out of earshot in the backyard, chasing a rogue butterfly. My brother, Mark, a man whose entire adult life had been a masterclass in borrowed privilege, looked at me with a practiced disdain, as if I were a particularly unpleasant stain on his impeccably tailored trousers. He said it with such certainty, such absolute conviction, that for a flicker of a second, a tiny, poisoned seed of doubt was planted. But then I looked past him, out at the sun-drenched lawn where my children's laughter echoed, at the sprawling home that held our lives, at the carefully tended garden that bloomed with my effort, and a different kind of certainty, cold and sharp, replaced the doubt. My life wasn't perfect, not by a long shot. There were the usual anxieties, the financial tightropes many walk. But it was. I had built it, piece by painstakingly acquired piece. And my children, with their boundless energy and their messy, beautiful hearts, were the very definition of success, not failure. Mark, however, operated in a different universe. His definition of success was proximity to wealth and power, and anyone who didn't fit his narrow, self-serving mold was simply substandard. He had always been like this, a living embodiment of entitlement, expecting the world to bend to his whims, and when it didn't, he blamed everyone else. I remember one Christmas, years ago. Our parents were still alive, blessedly unaware of the corrosive resentment festering within their elder son. Mark arrived late, as always, with a flimsy excuse about a crucial business meeting that always seemed to coincide with family gatherings. He'd brought a gift for my then-toddler daughter, a ridiculously expensive doll, still in its pristine packaging. He'd handed it to her with a flourish, then spent the next hour regaling anyone who would listen about his latest deal, his voice a booming testament to his own supposed genius. The doll sat untouched on the floor while my daughter, bless her simple heart, found more joy in a cardboard box. Mark, meanwhile, had barely acknowledged the elaborate meal I'd spent days preparing, instead picking at the food and complaining about the lack of sophistication. He'd been so absorbed in his own narrative of success that he'd completely missed the quiet disappointment etched on my mother's face. Then there was the inheritance. After my father passed, and then my mother, Mark, and I were the sole beneficiaries. He'd been a whirlwind of urgent financial planning and tax optimization, already counting his chickens before they'd even hatched, so to speak. He'd pushed for the quickest sale of our childhood home, dismissing my pleas for time to sort through sentimental items. "It's just bricks and mortar, Sarah," he'd said, his tone dripping with impatience. "Sentimental value doesn't pay bills." He saw assets, not memories. And when the money was finally distributed, he'd immediately announced his plans for a luxury apartment, a new car, and a well-deserved vacation. I, on the other hand, had used my share to secure my children's future, a down payment on this very house, investing in a stable foundation that Mark had never bothered to build. He'd always viewed my prudence as a personal affront, a silent judgment on his own prodigal lifestyle. The backyard gathering had been his idea. A reunion, he'd called it, a chance to mend fences and celebrate family. I'd been hesitant, knowing Mark's version of celebration often involved belittling those he deemed less successful. But my husband, bless his optimistic soul, had convinced me. "It's a chance, Sarah," he'd said. "Maybe he's changed." I'd gone along, not for Mark, but for my children, who deserved to have a relationship with their uncle, however flawed he might be. The afternoon had been pleasant enough, the children's laughter a melodic counterpoint to the polite, surface-level conversation. Mark had arrived predictably late, a bottle of expensive wine in hand, a forced smile plastered on his face. He'd complimented the house, his eyes sweeping over the meticulously kept garden, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. He'd even managed a few half-hearted questions about the kids. I'd felt a fragile thread of hope begin to weave itself through the usual tension, a desperate wish that perhaps, just perhaps, this time would be different. And then, it happened. We were sitting on the patio, the remnants of lunch spread before us. The children had gone inside to watch a movie, a temporary reprieve from adult conversation. Mark, emboldened by the wine and the perceived ease of the situation, leaned back in his chair, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. He took a long sip, his eyes meeting mine over the rim of his glass. "You know, Sarah," he began, his voice taking on that familiar, patronizing tone, "I've been observing you for a while now. And I have to say, it's a shame. You had so much potential." My heart gave a small, painful lurch. I waited, my breath catching in my throat. He continued, oblivious or perhaps deliberately dismissive of my reaction. "Look at this. This, suburban idol. 2 kids, a mortgage, a husband who probably handles all the finances because, let's be honest, you never were good with numbers. You settled. You gave up. It's just a family failure." The words landed with a sickening thud. Not just a failure, but a family failure. He wasn't just criticizing my choices, he was deeming my entire existence, my family unit, as a monumental, unredeemable disaster. The patio, moments before bathed in warm sunlight, suddenly felt cold. The air grew heavy, thick with unspoken resentments and years of Mark's casual cruelties. I could feel the blood drain from my face, leaving a hollow ache in its wake. My husband, sitting beside me, his hand reaching out to grip mine, looked at Mark with an expression of stunned disbelief. Mark, however, seemed to relish the moment. His smirk widened, a triumphant glint in his eyes. He seemed to think he'd delivered some profound, earth-shattering truth, a benevolent diagnosis from on high. He didn't see the quiet fury that was beginning to simmer within me. He didn't see the meticulous mental calculations that were already beginning to unfurl. He was too busy basking in his own perceived wisdom, his own projected superiority. He had no idea that he had just handed me the keys to his downfall, all without me needing to utter a single aggressive word. The silence that followed his pronouncement was deafening. My husband squeezed my hand, his silent support a lifeline. I could feel his confusion, his hurt on my behalf. But I was already moving past the immediate sting of his words. Mark's pronouncement, meant to wound, had instead clarified everything. He saw me through the lens of his own superficial values, failing to grasp the depth and complexity of what I had built. He saw a family failure because he couldn't comprehend the quiet, profound strength that lay beneath the surface. I took a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the air fill my lungs, steadying myself. My gaze remained fixed on Mark, my expression calm, almost serene. He seemed to expect tears, a stammered defense, a desperate plea for his approval. He got none of that. "Mark," I said, my voice low and steady, devoid of any tremor. "You're right. I did settle." His smirk faltered slightly. He hadn't expected agreement, not from me. "I settled for a life where my children's laughter is the most important sound," I continued, my eyes not leaving his. "I settled for a home filled with warmth and love, not just expensive decor. I settled for a partner who sees me, truly sees me, and values my contributions, no matter how they're quantified on a balance sheet." A flicker of confusion crossed his face. He was clearly waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the tears to start, for the sob story. "And yes," I said, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching my lips, "I do own everything." His brow furrowed. "What are you talking about, Sarah? You own what?" I stood up, my movements unhurried. I walked past him, towards the French doors leading to the living room. He watched me, a hint of unease now creeping into his posture. "You see, Mark," I said, my voice still quiet but carrying a newfound weight, "when Dad passed, and then Mom, it wasn't just the house and their savings that were distributed. There were other assets." I paused, letting the implication sink in. Assets that required careful management, long-term vision, and frankly, a level of responsibility you've always lacked. I walked into the living room, my husband following, his hand still on my back, a silent pillar of support. I went to the small, antique desk in the corner, a piece that had belonged to my mother, a piece Mark had never once shown interest in. I opened the top drawer, a drawer he'd likely never even noticed. Inside, among the neatly organized stationery and old photographs, lay a thick, bound document. I picked it up, holding it with both hands. It was the original incorporation papers for Evergreen Holdings, a company established by my father many years ago. A company that, for years, had been dormant, a shell with no active management. A company that, through a series of shrewd, almost clandestine maneuvers following my parents' deaths, I had quietly, meticulously, revitalized and expanded. A company whose sole purpose was to consolidate and manage all of my family's significant investments, including the original portfolio my father had amassed, the properties inherited from my parents, and crucially, the substantial shares in several lucrative businesses that had been transferred into its name. I walked back out onto the patio, the document held out in front of me. Mark was still sitting there, his arrogance momenter highly eclipsed by a genuine bewilderment. "This," I said, my voice resonating with quiet finality, "is Evergreen Holdings. And as the sole director and majority shareholder, I own it. I own the investment portfolio it manages. I own the properties it holds. I own the businesses it has a controlling stake in." I looked him directly in the eye. "Remember that crucial business meeting you always had? The one that prevented you from attending our parents' funeral properly? It was during that time, while you were busy networking and planning your next extravagant purchase, that I was dealing with lawyers, accountants, and financial advisors. While you were optimizing your inheritance, I was building a future. A future that, incidentally, is now far more substantial than anything you could ever hope to achieve with your fleeting deals." The color drained from Mark's face, leaving it a ghastly white. His mouth opened and closed a few times, but no sound came out. The smug satisfaction that had been so ingrained in his features moments before had evaporated, replaced by a dawning horror. He looked at the document, then at me, then back at the document, as if it were a foreign, alien object that had materialized out of thin air. My husband stood by my side, a steady presence, his eyes fixed on Mark's crumbling facade. The children's laughter, now muffled by the closed doors, seemed to drift in like a distant, happy melody, a stark contrast to the suffocating silence that had descended upon the patio. "You see, Mark," I said, my voice softening slightly, a chilling echo of empathy in its tone, "you always judged me by what I have, by what I hadn't according to your narrow definition. You never once considered what I have, or what I was quietly." He finally found his voice, a weak, reedy sound. But that can't be. I was supposed to inherit a significant portion of that. Dad promised. Dad promised you stability," I corrected him, my gaze unwavering. "And I delivered. He entrusted me with the responsibility of ensuring our family's legacy, not just for me, but for the generations to come. He saw your impulsiveness. He saw my dedication. He made provisions." The implication was clear, devastating. My father, recognizing Mark's irresponsibility, had placed the ultimate control and ownership of the family's substantial wealth in my hands, with clear instructions and legal frameworks that ensured Mark would never be in a position to squander it. And I, with a quiet resolve and a profound sense of duty, had honored that trust. Mark scrambled to his feet, his face a mask of frantic desperation. "This is a mistake. This is illegal. You can't just keep it all." I shook my head, a slow, deliberate movement. "It's all perfectly legal, Mark. And it's not keeping it all. It's managing it, as I was tasked to do. You, on the other hand, have demonstrated repeatedly that you are not equipped for such responsibility." He began to sputter, to rage, but his words lacked any real force. They were the desperate cries of a man whose entire worldview had just imploded. He looked utterly lost, adrift in a sea of his own making. I need to go," he stammered, his bravado completely gone. He fumbled for his car keys, his hands shaking. He didn't look at me again, his eyes darting around as if seeking an escape from the reality I had so calmly presented. He stumbled towards his car, leaving behind the expensive bottle of wine, a testament to his misplaced generosity, and a shattered sense of entitlement. The next few days were a whirlwind of panicked phone calls and increasingly desperate texts from Mark. He tried to rally support from distant cousins and bewildered aunts, painting me as a greedy, manipulative sister who had stolen his inheritance. He even tried to involve my husband's family, but my husband, having witnessed the entire scene, simply stated the facts with quiet authority, leaving Mark floundering. He sent a text at 3 a.m., a pathetic plea for a discussion, for understanding. He claimed he was broke, that he had debts, that he was losing everything. He even had the audacity to mention my children, implying they deserved a more prosperous uncle. He was the classic flying monkey, desperately seeking to use others as pawns to regain his footing. But the wheels of justice, in my quiet execution, had already turned. The legal documentation was ironclad. My father's foresight, combined with my diligence, had created a fortress around our family's assets. Evergreen Holdings was not just a company, it was a meticulously constructed mechanism designed to protect and grow wealth, shielded from the kind of reckless impulses Mark embodied. He hadn't just lost his expected inheritance, he had lost any claim to my goodwill, any right to family support based on entitlement. The consequences of his words were not immediate, explosive retribution, but a slow, chilling unraveling. His reputation, already tarnished by his often reckless financial dealings, took a permanent nosedive. The whispers of his entitlement, once dismissed as character flaws, were now viewed through the lens of his inability to grasp basic financial realities. He was no longer the charming, if slightly irresponsible, elder brother. He was a man who had judged the wrong person, who had fundamentally misunderstood the source of my strength. There was no grand confrontation, no dramatic scene. Just the quiet closing of doors, the legal affirmation of reality. The satisfaction wasn't in his public humiliation, though the social fallout was a welcome consequence. It was in the absolute, undeniable confirmation that my quiet strength, my diligent work, my deep love for my family, were not weaknesses, but the very foundations of my power. He had looked at my life and seen failure because he couldn't see the quiet, enduring success that pulsed beneath the surface. And in his arrogance, he had forgotten that I owned everything, not just the tangible assets, but the narrative, the control, and the absolute certainty of my own worth. The silence that followed was, for me, the sweetest sound of all.